Right. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I worked out this week that it's 20 years since I last spoke at an ARP conference. And I don't think I've ever spoken in here before either. So it's quite unusual for experience for me to be over here giving a talk in Edinburgh. So I'll try and keep the Glaswegian element of my talk to a minimum, so you can understand me. Okay. So this morning I want to talk about a very strange archaeological site. A site that is interest to me because interest in heritage, and that's because of the location of the site, which I'll come to in a moment. The site itself is a fine example of prehistoric rock art of the late Neolithic or early Bronze Age, located in an area where there are 70s or 80s near Dumbarton. And it's a stone that was identified by antiquarians in the 1880s and 1890s. And this drawing here that was undertaken by W.A. Donnelly in the 1890s is actually really the only record that we have of this stone that's based on an eyewitness account. And you can see from the scale, this is an enormous gritstone or sandstone panel of rock, an outcrop with it's kind of domed in appearance, and it measures something like 15 metres by 8 metres. So it's a giant outcrop and a very spectacular site that would have had great views down over the Clyde Valley to the south. And it's characterised by having extensive cup and ring markings, as well as more unusual motifs like these two four-toed footprints, which were recorded in the 1890s. They may not be prehistoric, but they certainly are not very modern additions to the stone. And that's just one of the kind of intriguing elements of this site that initially drew me to it. This drawing here is really the only drawing that we have of the site that's attempted to try and pull together all of the evidence from what Donnelly put in his drawing from the 1890s, but also it draws on a series of photographs that were taken of the stone in the 1930s. And I'll show you one or two examples of that as we go along. But what's remarkable is really how little recording has been undertaken of this particular panel. And this drawing was published by Ronald Morris, who was a great lover of rock art and published extensively on a range of different British examples of these types of sites. But this is not based on Morris's eyewitness account of this particular monument. He visited, but the site was already buried, and he wasn't able to see it. So this is just essentially based on the Donnelly drawing and the photographs. But you can see here again there's extensive cup and ring marking. It's quite a richly decorated rock with lots of motifs to interest those who are interested in trying to interpret what these kind of symbols mean. But actually up until about 2 years ago I wasn't really interested in rock art at all. It's something that's never interested me for a whole range of different reasons. But I took a particular interest in this site when I heard about it from a student previously, but an opportunity arose to get involved in a project looking at this site. And this was particularly something I was keen on because of my interest in prehistoric sites in urban places and the opportunities that affords for us as archaeologists to try and engage with local communities and use prehistory in opportunistic ways to help educate people, help improve their landscapes around them, or just help give people a sense of the time depth of the areas that they live. So in this case, and I apologise for this rubbish distribution map, but I haven't actually got a proper one made yet. This shows the location of the Cochno Stone in an urban park on the edge of Faithfully, which is a 1950s, 60s housing estate in the northern part of Clyde Bank in West Dumbarton. So right on the kind of urban fringes of Greater Glasgow, with the Kilpatrick Hills immediately to the north. So this interests me because automatically there's an interesting and a potentially huge urban population very close to this site that perhaps could be engaged in this in various different ways. The other thing that's quite intriguing about this site is the fact that it was that Ludwig Mann, a very well-known figure in Scottish archaeology, took a particular interest in the Cochno Stone in the 1930s. And this was around the time that Mann was excavating at Nappers in Clyde Bank, a site that he notoriously publicised, got thousands of people visiting the site, did a strange reconstruction of the monument, was on site giving lectures, a very eccentric character. And he heard of this rock art panel nearby, just to the north, and he visited the site, and he thought that the motifs on this rock were representing stories of how people in prehistory began to understand eclipses and were able to predict eclipses. And he he drew various different illustrations, like this one in the top right-hand corner, which is associated with the Nappers reporting, where he talks about this being the story of the defeat of the eclipse-eating monster, and trying to reflect this kind of really fanciful cosmological tale, which that's fine. I mean, he's entitled to come up with that interpretation. There's been thousands of other interpretations of rock art. But and you can see in this photograph here, and that's Ludwig Mann in the middle of the photograph there, in 1937, you can see that all of the rock art motifs have been painted white. And there's a series of lines and grids as well, which he added onto the site, which for him was showing the mathematical underpinning of what was happening at the site. So here we have a really incredible intervention where man came along and he painted the whole of this enormous rock art panel. And he also publicised this site, which previously was little known even to people who lived in the area. Now this had various different consequences, and this is a letter that was sent to the Ancient Monuments Inspectorate by one of the two landowners of the Cochno Stone, because the Cochno Stone lies on a land boundary, which in itself is interesting. One half owned by the council, the other half owned by a private landowner. And this private landowner at that time basically was very unhappy with the stone being visited by lots of people, and he said being damaged by people. And he said this was because of the activities of certain antiquarians who had expended much care upon the decoration of the monument. So therefore, Ludwig Mann's being fingered and blamed for the fact that suddenly lots of people are visiting the Cochno Stone, and yes, they're walking all over it, like this visit of the Glasgow Archaeological Society in the late 1930s. And this gives a sense of the scale of the rock art panel, by now with a wall around it, but that doesn't stop visitors getting in over a stile. People were walking all over it. And also the other thing that was happening was that people were increasingly carving their names onto the rock as well. We have very little records of how this was happening, but this is a picture from Ronald Morris's book, one of the few published photographs of the Cochno Stone, and you can see in the bottom there someone's carved PH on the rock next to these really spectacular giant cup and ring marks. So there was a general sense amongst the landowner and the authorities that the stone was increasingly becoming damaged by vandalism, by visitors walking on it, and the decision was taken in 1964, really, by the Ancient Monuments Board to bury the stone to protect it from future damage. And that work was carried out in the springtime in 1965. So the stone was buried, and then, unexpected, as you would expect, it gradually became forgotten, except by people who teach archaeology. This is really where I came in. In 2015, I was approached by a Spanish digital heritage company, Factum Arte, who'd picked up on this story of the Cochno Stone being buried 50 years, or what they thought was 50 years previously, but they didn't. It was buried in 1965, not 1964 as they had initially thought. And they were quite keen to have a digital heritage project that involved uncovering the Cochno Stone, digitally and photogrammetrically recording it, and then at some point in the future creating an exact 1-to-1 scale replica that they were going to 3D print in their studios in Madrid and then get to Clydebank somehow. So it's a really crazy scheme, but I was very intrigued, and I thought, well, there's so many opportunities here to engage the local community and do something with this. Why not? Let's go for it. Both of our institutions put a bit of money into getting a little trial season of excavation up and running in September 2015, essentially just to establish that the Cochno Stone definitely was under where it was supposed to be, and also to think about things like the condition of the stone, and to allow us to kind of think about the parameters of how we might actually uncover the stone properly over the whole of the monument. And that was a really successful few days, just working with a small team of students. And we very quickly realised that the stone wasn't buried beneath a metre of soil, as had always been said in any of the written accounts of this. In most places it was under about half a metre of soil, but the wall around the stone had been pushed in over the top of the rock. And in general, the stone, although in generally quite good condition, had obviously been bashed about a bit and really ill-treated in the 20th century. And we did various things, including a film was made by May Mells Thomas, who's a film director, which we used to try and get a bit of publicity for the project as well. So we found some really spectacular cup and ring marks. You can see in the bottom left-hand image there, some very big cup and ring marks. And also maybe you can make out in that image a kind of black blob lurking around the rock art. And this will look like the remnants of some kind of thing, like a melted bin bag or a melted bucket or something like that had obviously been set on fire and melted on the site before it was buried. And these are the kind of activities that are likely contributing to the decision to put it beyond use, as it were. And this is also something we found that was quite, excuse the Christmas ruler scale, but that was the only scale I had in my toolkit on the day. But this is a really enormous piece of rock art, a panel of graffiti, by B. Docherty with various other bits of writing. The date's not really easily decipherable, but it's certainly from the 20th century. And this gave us a real sense of the scale of the graffiti and damage of the stone, because we only looked at about 5% of the surface of the stone. We found this enormous bit of graffiti. We found fragments of white paint in the cup marks, which was presumably Ludovic Mann's paint. There was a rusty metal thing stuck to the top of the stone, and there was this kind of melted bucket and various other bits and pieces. So we knew that the stone as a whole probably had a whole range of different interventions in the modern day. So anyway, we managed to raise the money to go back a year later and carry out a complete excavation of the stone, which is quite a peculiar process, because we weren't really excavating, rather just uncovering something so that we could record it, and then we would bury it again. And that was really important that we were clear from the start that we would have to bury the stone again, because if we decided we wanted to have the stone exposed, then we would never have got permission to do the project from the landowner or from HES. So really we had to have these very tight parameters in terms of how we dealt with the stone, how we recorded it, and then how we reburied it at the end of the process. But for about 10 days in September last year, the stone was open and visible and was visited by a huge number of people. Lots and lots of people locally came up, and they told us amazing stories about how they remembered the Cochno Stone when they were children, back in the 50s and 60s. So that was the site. The council kindly removed a few dead trees and killed all the weeds that were on top of the stone, so it wasn't quite so difficult to get to, and that's what the scene that they greeted us as we started the site. And then we basically had this very painfully slow process over a week of using a mini digger and a dumper to remove the topsoil over the stone, but also doing it incredibly carefully. So we could only do this down to a certain depth above the stone before we had to start to use plastic tools to clean off so that we didn't scrape the surface of the stone. So we were having to wear plastic shoes or work in bare feet. We had plastic shovels, soft brushes, all sorts of things that were in place to try and avoid any unnecessary damage to the surface of the stone. And this took about 5 or 6 days because there was a lot of rain, and it was muddy, and it was a very horrible experience, really, and very stressful too. But very quickly we started to get really incredible results. So you can start to see coming through some cup and ring marks here, and also there's a name written up, running up the kind of bottom right hand of the slide, which I think in this case is a Carmichael. Very nice kind of book plate kind of graffiti. Maybe it's Victorian, I'm not sure, but it's not. It's certainly much nicer than most of the graffiti that's on the stone. So we started to find a lot of amazing stuff. And once we'd cleared off the stone to this level where it was a bit muddy and grotty, then one of our students, Danny, who is a mature student and a retired fireman, had the genius idea that we should get the local fire brigade to come in and clean the stone with their hoses. And I thought, this is how could this ever happen? But sure enough, at the start of the second week, the local fire brigade came up. They closed the road, the Cochno Road that runs around the site. They parked the fire engine. They got an enormous hose down to a water point, and then they spent several hours on the site hosing the whole stone to expose this really incredible rock art on the surface of the Cochno Stone. And it was a really amazing day. It was when everything started to come together, and you could really start to appreciate the scale of this enormous domed rock, which had these incredible motifs. And that gives you a sense of how big some of these cup and ring marks are by the people standing next to it there. And just we did a bit of general cleaning, and then we could start to record everything. So it was a really incredible process. And one of the things that actually I was astounded by was that not only did we find traces of Ludovic Mann's paint, but we realised that he had painted the site in a multicoloured series of colours which related to different elements of what he was trying to do. So the cup and ring marks were painted white, or in some cases green. The grid was yellow, and you can see some very straight yellow lines, these incredibly straight lines running across the monument. And these are the kind of east-west lines. And then there was lines that ran around the site as well, which were in red. And you can see just one of those running across at the bottom there. And there were also some blue lines as well. And there's a suggestion that perhaps even some of the bits of stone were being shaded in with black as well. So it looks like Mann painted the whole of the surface of the stone, which is an incredible task. an incredible and creative piece of work, albeit the amazing defacement of an ancient monument with paint. So it's difficult to really know what to make of this. But anyway, this was a really incredible discovery. But also, we realised that one of the reasons why we probably had to bury the stone again was a conservation issue, because we don't really know how long this paint would survive if it was exposed to the elements again. So part of what we're trying to do is to understand what man was trying to do, because as far as we can tell from looking at the archives, he didn't really take or record many notes about this process. So it's actually quite mysterious what was going on up here. How long did it take him? What's the colour coding all about? What exactly is going on here? So this is a really incredible discovery, I think, of a really significant part of the historiography of Scottish archaeology. We also, we didn't record just the prehistoric motifs, but we also were interested in the modern engagements of the site as well. So we wanted to try and document and record all aspects of the modern graffiti that were on the stone. And a student did a dissertation on this, Alison, and she has documented over 100 different bits of graffiti on the surface of the stone, which gives a real sense of what's happening here in terms of local people coming up here, people writing their names on the stone. There's names, dates, sometimes little kind of, some people put their names inside little houses. There's a few little kind of pictograms and various other things. So there was a lot of graffiti going on here, and there was a real crescendo in the 1960s, which coincides with the urban expansion of Glasgow and Greater Glasgow moving towards the edge of the park, and probably is what finally provoked the stone being buried, because of the quantity of graffiti being written on the stone. But our primary objective was to gather data for the digital replica of the stone, which is the final objective of the project. And this is Ferdinand from Factamarty and some of his colleagues here setting up this station where they're taking really high resolution photography systematically across the whole site to collect really high resolution data sets that they can then 3D model the surface of the stone. They also recorded everything using a drone as well, which produced some very nice imagery. So this allowed us to have a very high quality photographic and digital record of the surface of the stone that we can then use for a number of different purposes, not just the creation of a replica at some point in the future, but also for the analysis of things like the quantity and quality of carvings on the surface, the potential for looking at things like phasing, and also investigating the means of production of these symbols, because we can start to work out, what we can pick out individual peck marks on the surface of the stone using this technique. So there's a huge data set there that we can use to analyse the prehistoric side of this site as well. We also were fortunate to have the Scottish 10 team come on site, and they carried out a laser survey scan of the site as well. And the data from that's really spectacular. I'll show an image of that in a few minutes. And so this gave us a different form, a different data set to work with, again recording all of the rock art in very high level detail, in much more detail than we would ever be able to get with an archaeological drawing. And we were also filmed for a History Channel documentary called Ancient Impossible. This documentary is going to be aired later in the year on the History Channel. And initially they wanted to do a small feature about us as part of a wider programme on other projects, but I think there's going to be a whole episode that's just focused on the Cochno Stone. And they interviewed all of us extensively for a very, very long period of time with very enthusiastic American questions that were a bit misguided. But I think we got there in the end. And the guy there with his back to us taking the photograph there, this was a local guy called Stevie, who was on site every day. I'm not quite sure how he managed to. He was just always there, and he became like a kind of guardian of the stone. And he remembered the stone from when it was before it was buried, and he knew everyone who visited the site locally, and was a real character, and kind of offered a connection between us and the local community, and really welcomed us into working in this project. He's a deeply eccentric character, to say the least. We found lots of stuff in the topsoil. Lots of it was just things that you would imagine would be there in material that was taken from a nearby field and dumped on the stone in the 1960s. And all that stuff was cleaned up actually by a work experience school pupil in the archaeology department last week. But we also found some nice stuff, this Red Cross medal, which has got some writing in the back, which hopefully we can clean up and decipher. And we found 2 marbles at the bottom slope of the stone up against the wall that runs around the monument, which I don't think it's too fanciful to imagine that children were playing on the Cochno Stone using marbles and that the form of the stone would lend itself quite well to games involving trying to get marbles into the cup marks, I guess. So this is a really exciting discovery, I think. So again, those offered a hint of the modern uses of this place. We got lots of media coverage at the time on across the newspapers, on BBC Scotland, Newsnight, and things like that. And that was really great to see that coverage of what we were doing. And then at the end of the project, we covered it back over again. We put down some geotextile, covered over the bottom part with it by hand, and then a machine came and filled everything else back in, thankfully. And that's Hugh Williams, who's a BBC Scotland reporter, who you've maybe seen before on telly, who ended up being there almost every day. He just couldn't keep away. And he recorded live interviews with me on Twitter, and he had several pieces on the radio about it as well. So he was a real friend of the project. And we had the misfortune to turn up on the backfilling day when there was about 5 of us who had to backfill all of this with buckets. It was a really difficult day, but he was happy to help out. Even Stevie helped out that day, which is the first time he'd lifted a finger in the whole project. So this is the kind of product we're getting here. And I mean, we haven't really done anything with this yet. We've got some amazing images. This was tweeted and has been publicised by Scottish 10 already in HES. And this just shows the real quality of that data and how we can play with that, and we can play about with light levels and 3D and so on, and really start to add to our understanding of what's on the surface of the rock. And this is also already hinting at different phases and various other things going on the surface of the stone, and it's really spectacular imagery. There's also an online 3D viewer, which I'm happy to send anyone the link if anyone wants to ask me about that. I can send you the link to that, which has got the photogrammetry data, and this just shows, again, the quality of that, the resolution of that. And this is just a screen grab, so it looks a bit fuzzy, but on screen you can blow up to a very high extent and really analyse the data. And it's very clear that Ronald Morris's drawing's wrong, that Donnelly's drawing's wrong, that there's much more on the stone than is almost visible to the naked eye. And it's also picked up lots of additional graffiti as well. So we're going to be able to produce from this the definitive drawing of the surface of the Cochno Stone, which in turn will allow us to really understand the extent of what's happening on that panel. We've got a couple of side projects going on. Alison's been looking at the graffiti, as I said already. She started to pull that apart. And one of the things that's really interesting is that I'm fairly sure that we've got a few examples of rubbish modern cup and ring marks. I've circled one there. I'm fairly sure that a child or someone came along and thought, oh, that looks easy. I can do a concentric circle with a hole in the middle, and ended up with this appalling rubbish effort. And there's 3 or 4 different places we've got these really awful pecked cup and ring marks, which are actually suspiciously similar to someone's name, which is also pecked in the same crude way as well. So I think that probably there's also some replication of the prehistoric rock art here, which is really interesting and something we want to explore. And one of the things we've also been doing is we've started to put out feelers within the local community to actually get the graffiti artists to come forward and talk to us and actually tell us about what the stone meant to them, why did they carve their name, what's their story, what's their association with the stone. And that's something which is an ongoing kind of element of the project, is that kind of oral history of how people engage with the stone. And that kind of takes us, I just want to finish by just reflecting where we are just now in taking the project forward, and not really just thinking about the archaeological information, but more about how we can use what we've done so far and the potential of the Cochno Stone to really engage with the local community in different ways. And this is one of the nicest examples of that. We've started to get local people who are giving us photographs and are telling us stories about how they used the Cochno Stone, or the Druid Stone as it's known locally, and what it meant to them. And archaeologists didn't take many photographs of the stone, but luckily local people did. And here's just 3 examples of photographs, including someone on their wedding day who went up to the Cochno Stone, and then there's this guy standing here. We've got the names of all these people as well. And perhaps the most exciting story for me is of these 2 gentlemen sitting on the stone in the bottom image, which is a picture that was actually used by Western Bartonshire Council. And those 2 guys, I can't remember both their names. One of them is called Smith. I think the other one's called Cairns, which is quite a good prehistoric name. And so I got the names of the 2 guys, and I said to Alison, their names aren't on the stone by any chance, are they? And they were. Both their names were carved on the stone right next to each other. So that was a really incredible, kind of almost touching connection to the very recent past of these 2 young men. And apparently one of them is still alive. So hopefully, again, we can start to fill in some of those gaps in the stories. But the other thing that's interesting here is that, and this kind of phrase I've used in the bottom of the slide, is this sense of shame. And this is something that came across from a lot of people I talked to, was that people unfaithfully are embarrassed by the fact that the Cochno Stone had to be buried. They feel as if it was a reflection on their community, that they couldn't be trusted to manage the heritage within their area, that somehow it was their fault, that it had to be taken away and it had to be protected from them. And there's a real sense of that within the local community, even amongst people who were not around in the 1950s and 60s. But it's known locally. It's a very well-known story about what happened. And this notice board reinforces this. This was put in, I think, in the 1990s in the urban park. And as you can see, it's not been maintained. It's in a terrible state. But in the top left-hand corner, it's got this. It has 2 or 3 sentences on the rock art in the area, because there's quite a few other examples. And it says essentially, some of the rock art has been buried to protect it from people. And there's this sense that it had to be protected, and it had to be buried, and it had to be hidden away. And there's a real sense that people have been disenfranchised from the heritage in their area. And I think that this is particularly unfair, because I'm very sure that at the time, people locally were never told about the significance of the Cochno Stone. They were never told that this was one of the most spectacular pieces of rock art in Northern Europe. They were never given that sense that it was something worth treasuring and looking after in that sense. And so they engaged with it in their own way, the way that you would expect children to engage with things. They wrote their name on it, they played on it, they walked on it, they enjoyed it. And somehow this has become transferred into a problem that had to be solved by this very draconian measure of burying the stone without any real forward strategy for how that would work out in the future. So I think that part of what I want to try and do is to try and give this back to people in the local community, to try and give them a sense of ownership, and to try and re-presence it within their lives again. And we've been doing that in various different ways. We started to work with school kids, not just locally but elsewhere as well. So I've been working, developing little bits of teaching resources within the Curriculum for Excellence. In this case, I'm a module called People in Society, which is about trying to teach children about social decision making. And so it's a little module where we talk about the Cochno Stone and the story of it, and then they have to decide at the end of the process what happens next with the Cochno Stone. How does society decide and value heritage? We also did some things during the course of the excavations, where we had children from there's a local primary school that's 5 minutes walk from the location of the Cochno Stone. They came on site. I was drawing cup and ring marks on the walls of the school with permission of the teachers, of course. We had a little pop-up rock art lab where the kids were recording rock art in the 1 or 2 panels that are visible. And the other thing that I've been doing is what I call the Cochno Stone, where we've been going to different schools and drawing the outline of the Cochno Stone at 1-to-1 scale in playgrounds, and then getting the kids to fill in their own cup and ring marks after talking them through what they're all about, and they can say what they think they are. And then once they've done that, then they can add their own symbols as well. What's their equivalent symbols to what people had in prehistory? And that's worked really well, and that's something that I hope will become a Curriculum for Excellence package of materials that can be given to schools across Scotland and can be used either with the Cochno Stone or with local rock art in a kind of bespoke package. It's also very important that we get the local community on board, not just in terms of visiting the excavation and keeping them informed with all of our results, but also actually trying to see what they see as the future of the Cochno Stone. And we had a meeting in March where people came along and we updated them the project, but also we had a conversation with them as well about what they wanted to happen next, what the opportunities were for them to get involved in the next chapter of the story of the Cochno Stone. There's no point in me just coming in and imagining I know what's best and I think I've got the solution. It's about also thinking what the needs of people who live locally. And it's very strongly supported by Gil Patterson, who's a local MSP, who even passed a motion in the Scottish Parliament saying how great the project was, and came to that meeting as well, which was really great, and that's really important for the local people to see that support from at that government level almost. So there's a few things that are coming up which are kind of low-level things. We are the Western Bartonshire site for the Scotland in 6 initiative, which is a Dig-It 2017 thing, and apparently you can vote for that on their Facebook site in June. And the top 6 county sites from across Scotland will get a little package of social media things and other stuff. I can't remember what it is, Simon, but it's good. It's worth winning, isn't it? It's worth winning, yeah. So yeah, please do vote for the Cochno Stone in that. I've applied for a small amount of funding from the Being Human Festival, which is about trying to take an arts and humanities research out into communities for public engagement events. And I want to try and run an event with local schools about Ludovic Mann and the eclipse-eating monster, and try and use some of the chalk work with local schools as well. So I'm awaiting results of that funding bid. And I've managed to secure money to hold a seminar and workshop in November on public engagement in prehistoric rock art, and I'm bringing in a few experts who've worked in different projects which are specifically about how you use rock art to talk to the general public about prehistory and various other things. And I hope to involve people from the local community. And that night in the workshop, there was over 20 people signed up to be involved in a kind of a loose committee of people who wanted to do stuff with the Cochno Stone. So hopefully they can come along to that meeting as well and talk to people who will give them small ideas and giant, hugely ambitious ideas about what could perhaps happen next and what the potential ways of funding that might be. There's also potential line with Scotland's Rock Art Project, which is a new HES initiative, where they're trying to record all rock art in Scotland, go and check everything in the NMRS, but also make sure that this is involving community groups to do photogrammetry and to record everything to the same consistent level. And what I'm very keen on is that the people who do this are not just people who are in heritage societies and who are the people that normally do this kind of stuff. I'm very keen that we actually get people who live in faithfully in the local community who are actually able to learn to use photogrammetry techniques and record the 15 or 16 rock art panels that are in their local vicinity. So I'm very keen to try and get them involved. So I've already told people locally this is going to happen, and I'm on the steering group for this project. So I'll be very keen, strongly advising that they try and reach out to as broad a range of the population as possible when trying to get people recording and working with their own rock art. So hopefully there'll be some skills, opportunities for local people with this as well, and again give them a better understanding of the archaeological resource. And this is a slide which is a very cheap and cheerful slide, which I kind of showed at the public meeting I had, where I wanted to get a sense of what people wanted to happen. You know, did they want more information locally or online or apps and that kind of thing? Did they want, for instance, a walking trail linking up all of the prehistoric rock art? Do they want the Cochno Stone uncovered and left visible, or do they want it to be buried as it is just now, but with a replica put nearby, which is the kind of initial idea we had? Because some local people have said to us, you know, oh, you've got to keep it buried because the Neds will just paint it again. You know, so there's a lot of local people who say, no, you've got to bury it, you've got to keep it protected. So this is again, it's not, we can't just assume that we know how people think, you know, because I'm not part of that community. They're the experts in what works for them. And also, the MSP is very excited about the concept of even building a visitor centre over the Cochno Stone, so having it exposed and clear, but inside a building you can lock. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. But you could imagine how it could become a rock art research centre. You could have a building and it could make a contribution to the local economy. There's all sorts of ways that this rock art, which is currently redundant and buried and is hidden and put beyond use, can become something transformational for this community. And that's really what I'm trying to see if we can explore in the coming few years with this project. So I think I'll leave it there. There's lots of people to thank mentioned there, and all of the reports on the work so far are on my blog, which you'll find if you just search for Urban Prehistorian, and so everything's on there, freely accessible. And there's also a few Twitter feeds as well, which have got updates and things on the project too. So please do follow those things, and hopefully as things develop during the year, then we'll keep on posting more information online. And thanks very much for your attention. Thank you.